Hi everyone, welcome and thanks for joining us today. My name is Margie Galarno and I'm part of the City of Toronto Business Services team. Today our team will be providing you with an overview of the new Ontario Small Business Support Grant. The format of our webinar today will include a brief presentation on this new grant program, and then we'll focus on answering some of your questions that you posted on Eventbrite. Before we begin, I wanted to highlight some things. We'll be recording this session so we can post it on our City of Toronto Business Resources page to benefit others that may not have been able to attend today. We've muted everyone's audio because we've experienced background noise in the past and it interferes with the quality of the presentation. If you have any technical issues during the webinar, just try leaving the webinar and logging back in again, as this usually restarts your system to get back in. So that's it for the highlights for the housekeeping items. Now I want to just get us started. Supporting our webinar today, we're so grateful to have joining us Jeannie Chang, a partner and regional tax leader with MNP. And we're also very thankful to be working once again with Brian Watson from Flow Ventures and Clean Tech North, as well as Paul Connor from Clean Tech North. Both Brian and Paul have been invaluable to our team supporting our Business TO Support Center and our numerous webinars on government programs over the last year. I'll now pass it over to Brian to get us started. Thank you. Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you very much. And for all of you that have businesses and employees, you'll know that Jeannie joining us today, we really do have to thank her for that. As at the end of this week, all the T4s are due out to anybody that has employees. So I really do want to thank Jeannie for joining us from MNP and taking time out of a schedule that I know doesn't really involve much sleep these days. So we're going to kick off with a little bit of a presentation on this particular program, but also a little summary of what some of the other programs are that are out there. There is a whole pantheon of programs. Some are right for some people, some are right for others. So Paul, my colleague here, is going to give a good summary of those and any changes that have happened with some of the other programs. So with that, Paul, I'll turn it over to you, and then once we're done with the presentation, I'll take back over and lead some Q&A based on the questions that were submitted at time of registration. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Brian. So this is our title page for today. I'll dwell on the disclaimer for a moment. These programs are changing from time to time, sometimes with little or no notice. And so we always advise people to consult with professionals and to check back with the program descriptions online at official government websites, ideally. But we're doing the best that we can to keep up. And this is Brian's and my smiling faces, so you have a sense of who's talking with you today. And this is our guest speaker, Jeannie Chang, who has been with us before, and we're really grateful to have her with us. And this is what we'll be covering today. We have a new program. It's been around since about November, but we've decided to cover it in particular today because the lockdowns are being extended, and we want to make sure that everyone's in the loop on this one, which is the Ontario Personal Protective Equipment Grant. There will be a lot of detail about the new program that just started at Christmas, the Ontario Small Business Support Grant, and the Business Development Bank of Canada, or BDC's, new highly affected sectors credit availability program, a lending program for somewhat larger businesses. And then a quick side-by-side review of 6 more programs, I believe. We're just updating you on new developments, extensions, happily, with some of those. So the Ontario PPE grant program, up to $1,000 for very small businesses, 2 to 9 employees that have had to spend money on masks, signage, gloves, sanitizer, what have you, since the start of the pandemic. If you've kept your receipts, that is good. You can go to the Ontario government website and go after the reimbursement for what you've spent on PPE expenses since March 17th of last year. So you can see it's an extensive list, and maybe you'll even get some ideas from this list of things that you haven't bought previously that might still be useful for the next few months as we slowly emerge from pandemic restrictions. 2 to 19 employees, I should correct myself. Originally what I read was 2 to 9, and now it's 2 to 19 employees allows you to qualify for this program in specific sectors that you see here: retail, accommodation and food services, personal and laundry services, that would include dry cleaning, I guess, repair and maintenance, like your garage, or coming into your home to work on stuff. Next, and our primary focus today, the Ontario Small Business Support Grant. This is also for smaller businesses, but under 100 employees, so a little bit more expansive. At least $10,000 up to $20,000, non-repayable, to make up the revenue lost just after Boxing Day and meet your business expenses. To qualify, you have to have had a revenue decline year over year, say April 2019 to April 2020 of 20% or more, and have been affected by provincial lockdown orders since the 26th, nothing previous to that. Your 100 employees can be a mixture of full-time, part-time, and seasonal. Each body adds up to the 100. You have to have a business number and a business bank account. A lot of other programs have changed that, but this one still holds to that. And there's a list of eligible business types, which I'm going to show for you in a minute. It's fairly simple to apply. You go to the website, and it's the same website that you apply for that PPE grant I just spoke of, and there's one other program there. And you just attest to your qualifications and give your information, and they may come back to you requiring more information. If you're an affiliated or a seasonal business, there's some considerations on the right side of this slide here. If you own more than one business that's affiliated, and if it's affiliated, then you have to add them all up together to qualify, and you can only apply the once. So in aggregate, you have to have the 100 employees or less. In aggregate, you have to have that gross revenue decline of 20% or more. And it's controlled by the businesses altogether are controlled by the same person or entity. Now to the seasonal thing. If you're a winter seasonal business, you can use a different comparison period. Like instead of April to April, it can be December, January to December, January, as you see here. Summer seasonal businesses will just use the same April to April though. And here is half of the list of eligible business types. It is very specific, and it is a drop-down menu on the form. What that means is you may very well be excluded from this, and you want to look carefully. And if there's even slight room for interpretation, then perhaps choose that option and apply. But there are some that have not been included, some categories of business that have not been included as eligible for this grant. In that case, there is recourse that we will tell you about at the end of the slide presentation. There's contact information that I will leave up on the screen. So hopefully everyone watching and listening now has had a chance to go through this half of the list, and I can go on to the other half of the list. Things like performing arts, like playwrights or theaters rather, personal care services, personal services, touring guide services. These are all things where it's logical and clear that they would have been affected by the recent lockdown orders, which are really extensive. And finally, there's a list here of ineligible enterprises, so don't bother to apply if you were already required to close prior to the stage 2 modified public health measures, and the essential businesses that are permitted to operate with capacity restrictions, like those big box stores selling groceries and so forth. If they are just allowing a certain number of people in at a time, then they're still good to go and they're not eligible for this grant. Also, if your enterprise, I should say, is owned by the government, federal, provincial, or municipal, or by a person who holds federal or provincial office, then don't apply for this grant. onward to the BDC program. That's $25,000 to $1 million loans to businesses with a 50% revenue fall year over year in 3 months out of the last date. So you're comparing, say, April 2019 to April 2020, and then maybe you had the same thing August 2019 to August 2020, and so forth. So any 3 out of the 8 months previous. And you can get this guarantee until June 30th of this year, and you can pay it back over 10 years. Nice low interest rate of 4%, and you may have a grace period before starting payments, principal of up to 12 months. And so it seems a fairly expansive program that you go through. You have to be obviously Canadian based. You have to have been viable and financially stable prior to this. This loan the money has to be used to keep going. In other words, not pay off debt or refinance debt. And it's unlike the previous grant program. You can apply for each legal entity that you own or that your entity owns up to a maximum combined amount of $6.25 million. And then there's a long list of ineligible businesses. You'll get the slide deck afterwards, so you'll be able hopefully to click on that link and see for yourself. And you go through your business's financial institution. There's no other way. There's no online form or whatever. You just go to your bank or your credit union or what have you and tell them that you're interested in this program. A long list of participating financial institutions exists. So any reasonable business expense may be covered, wages, rent, what have you. Here's the interesting thing about this program. You have to have tried to get the Canada Emergency Rental Subsidy or the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy first. You have to try and get these first and use the same attestation forms that you provided to them, demonstrating that minimum 50% revenue decline for this program for at least 3 months out of the past 8, not necessarily consecutive, in other words. And if you have applied for these and gotten it, then it'll affect your eligibility in that you'll probably have fewer expenses that you need to cover. But if you've applied for it and you didn't get it, that's okay. You can apply for this program, but just provide the same attestation forms and the financial statements that reflect at least those 3 months of monthly year-over-year revenue decrease, minimum of 50% per month within the 8 months prior to the actual application that you submit. So I'm going to go back to the slide here. Now the other programs, I'm going to roll through this quickly so that we have the maximum possible time for questions and answers. The individual benefit, the Canada Recovery Benefit, that's if all else fails for the businesses, then individual employees can apply for this. The qualifications haven't really changed. The benefit amounts haven't really changed. You see them here. But there is a proposal in hand from the past week or so to increase to 38 weeks the total benefit that you can get up until 25 September of this year. You have to report every 2 weeks, keep seeking work, don't turn down work, and you can't receive pay or salary above 50% of the average income of your previous 52 weeks if you're applying on the basis that your income is down. If you just can't work at all, then you just apply. Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, that hasn't changed in terms of who can apply, but now it's 48 weeks. There is a very detailed calculator, so we do not attempt to reproduce it here. But you go to that calculator and it'll tell you based on your revenue drop and your wages that you're paying, what's your base and what's your top up. Like if you were in a highly affected business, highly affected by lockdowns, that is, then a top up subsidy is available to you. But all that scaling is impossible to reproduce on a simple presentation. So you just go to that website and have a crack at it, ideally in conference with your business consulting advisors or accountants. And the program has been extended to June 2021. Work sharing program, very much an overlooked program, I think, in amongst all these others, because it always existed. They just made it easier to get, and they made it possible to have it for longer. The idea is if you have any 2 or more people doing the same job, but there isn't enough work to go around, then they can go on EI for half their time, say, and the other half they can split the one job, say, that remains. So it's a very interesting program, and they work with you personally on it. So if you do have that sort of workforce where you got a lot of people doing the same thing, it's definitely worth having a look at. And to the last, yeah, here we go. The last three, the rent subsidy that I mentioned before, thankfully tenants can now apply, or mortgage holders if you own the property yourself. They're not left out, as opposed to landlords before. And it will cover up to 65% of eligible property related expenses, rent, mortgage, and what have you. You should apply soon. This program is, unless it gets extended, which we can't rule out, but right now it's 13th of March that you should go for this by. Canada Emergency Business Account. This has been around for a very long time, but gradually the requirements have been loosened and the amount of money that you can get has increased. You no longer need a business account. You do need that CRA business number. Non-deferrable eligible expenses, again, like rent or wages or whatever that you haven't gotten from any other program. So no stacking. And now it's another 20K has been added, $20,000 has been added to this. And even if you repaid the $40,000 already, you can still get that 20K. Again, the deadline for this is imminent, March 31st. So if you haven't gone after this yet and you think you need it, please do take a look as soon as you can. And finally, the FedDev Ontario Regional Relief and Recovery Fund, or RRRF, this has been topped up very recently, like in the past few weeks. There is more money for all the regional development agencies in Canada. Like I think it's around $2 billion now that they're spending all across Canada on this program. It covers you if you have not been able to qualify or be eligible for other programs like the wage subsidy, the rent subsidy, whatever. It's for similar purposes, viable businesses that were operational before March of last year with a business operating account, and it's for operational funding only. And it has a couple of different streams in there, and there's, I think, still a stream for innovative, like startup type businesses, which FedDev Ontario, they've done a lot of good for the tech startup community and the startup community in general over the years. So that's an understandable stream to have right in there. So that's it for my update on all the programs, and maybe I'll turn it over to Brian to take us the rest of the way.
All right. Thank you very much, Paul. Hopefully you can hear me. Can you go back to the presenter slide so that we can have Jeannie's bio and title there? So thank you very much, Paul. That's great. A lot of programs there, a lot of information. I know a number of people had a lot of questions about the requirements for this program. So hopefully that did give you a bit of a sense of what's eligible and what's not, and also what other programs might be out there. I did have a number of questions that revolved around startup businesses just at the beginning of the pandemic, and just speaking to Paul's last point on the RRRF, that is a program that there are not a lot of programs out there for startup grants. So you're going out to create a business, you're building something since COVID started, but if you were operational just before that, you were incurring expenses, etc., that may be a program that you'd want to look at. In addition to that, and then that's a loan program, low interest, no interest loan with some forgivable parts to it. We are hoping to see, and the proof will be in the announcements, but we are hoping to see soon additional changes to a number of these programs. Federal and provincial budgets should be coming out soon, and from what we know, we do think it's going to have a little bit of a flavor of recovery. But for now, for all those people that are building businesses starting during the pandemic, there's not a lot of support out there. So I want to get into the specific questions. That there were just a number of questions on that sort of startup question. First question that I've got is around real estate agents and can they apply for this program? To my knowledge, Paul, and correct me if I'm wrong because I know you've been looking at that list very recently. I don't believe real estate agents and real estate professionals were included in the last lockdown. So for this particular program, it may not make sense, but some of the other programs like the RRF, SEBA, things like that, I'd encourage you to take a look at. If you're in the sort of real estate side or any other types of businesses that were not covered. Got a question here. Oh, this was the startup questions. I'll pass that. I have a question. We have a business. We're involved with street festivals. Are those operating this year? Obviously not strictly a question about the grant itself, but the businesses. My understanding, and I don't know if anybody from the city knows anything else about this or can comment about it, but my understanding is that street festivals and any festivals that the city is involved in are not running until, I believe that there was an announcement about 2-3 days ago about this, that they're not going to be running until at least July. Was my understanding. So I think the answer is no. So if you are impacted, for example, if it's an arts festival, the reason I want to address this question is, those sorts of things are covered. Some of those sorts of activities are covered in that list of eligible businesses. So take a good look at that list. You may be eligible for the Ontario Small Business Support Grant. It goes for arts and festivals and venues and things like that. Moving along, how to apply, and Jeannie, this is a question I might ask you. If there are a number of different owners of a business and they report tax individually, is there anything that would prevent them from applying for this? To my mind, I wouldn't think so, because the business is a separate entity with its own business number, despite the number of owners. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah,
We don't have a lot of detail.
Yeah, no, they do. So this is specifically relating to the Ontario Small Business Grant. I believe the question is relating to that. So it just needs to meet the criteria, which involves that the business itself was required to close or significantly restrict services because of the province-wide shutdown. And the revenue decline would have to meet the 20% test. And it had 99 employees or less. And when we're kind of looking at each of those tests, I think you do kind of take into account other businesses that it may be affiliated with. But you'd have to kind of like look through the revenue criteria to make sure that you qualify. But it doesn't appear that there's any restriction if one of your businesses met those criteria, that another, like a separate business, which you may operate under a different, like a different company, for example, that they could also potentially qualify for that test. So I think you just need to make sure that each business itself would meet those tests, and then you can determine whether or not you can apply for it on that basis.
Perfect. And one question that spins out of this program a lot is beyond those criteria, how can I use the money? What are the use of proceeds of this grant? This is actually the most, I think I can say this definitively, the most open grant that I have ever seen in terms of what you can use the money for. Often there's stipulations of you must use it for rent, you must use it for this, and the other. The Ontario government has done a good job of making this a very open program, saying basically, we don't know where your best use of money is. It could be paying yourselves or staff, your rent, your taxes. You get to decide that. As long as you meet those criteria that Jeannie mentioned and Paul mentioned, you are eligible and can use that money once you get it. Now, the once you get it is also an interesting question. We've got a number of questions here that I'll address now too. Timing is an interesting question. How long is it taking to get these processed? I know the ministry is trying to get those processed 2 weeks after after they're submitted, but I know there is a bit of a backlog, so they are asking people for patience. If it's been longer than that, then actually, Paul, I think the last slide has the ministry's contact information, Service Ontario, and the one email there. You can contact Service Ontario if it's been longer than about a month. It's probably wise to follow up, but I do know that there is a backlog, and some companies are still waiting. So they're doing the best that they can to process these fast. And then so the phone number there beside the email, smallbizsupportgrant@ontario.ca, the phone number beside it is a Service Ontario number that can be called for inquiries about people's applications. While I'm here, for those people that asked about the sectors that don't seem to fall into the list that Paul had highlighted there definitely are sectors that don't fall into that. The Ontario government is aware of that. They're aware of some of them. For example, dry cleaners didn't necessarily fall into the categories. The email that is there, smallbizsupportgrant@ontario.ca, if you believe that you should have been affected, that you were impacted by the December shutdown, but you are not captured in one of those qualifying sectors that were in the list, that email you can use to send a note to the Ontario government and the people that are managing the program to spell out your case. So again, I know we had initially a number of dry cleaning operations that wanted to apply for this. I know a number of them have used that email. I don't know if that it has changed yet in terms of the application, but that is the path to try and to try and use to get yourself added to the list if you're not there. Okay, moving down the questions here. Can a self-employed individual with a registered business name apply for the grant? My answer is yes, as long as you have a business number, a CRA business number. I believe the answer is yes. Just having the business name registered, I don't think is enough. Jeannie, is that correct? It's the business name registration doesn't necessarily imply that there's the business number, the CRA business number, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So they would need a registered business number, which means that they would then be able to apply for the grant. So I can double check if it's as simple as just making sure you're registered, but
yeah, the representatives from the Ontario government did say that it was really just having that number because that's one of the keys that they use in the database. So you can register now for that number and have it be applicable as long as you met all the other criteria and you were operating the business before. You can register now, and I think actually let me flip back from the questions. Paul, do you still have that up? Yep. I believe. I don't know if we have the link still on these slides. If not, we'll try and add it to the final slides for where to register for the business number. And for many people, if the terminology you don't recognize, it's usually the number that ends in if you're charging GST, HST, RT001 or something like that, RP001 if you've got payroll. It's that preamble number before the RT and RP that they are looking for. Okay. Is it possible to select a month other than April 2019, even if our business was registered prior to April 2019? Would it be possible to compare, May 2019 and 2020? This is a great question. The answer is it depends, and it depends on what has been updated in the Ontario government form. My recommendation for you, Adnan, would be to log in using your business number, log into the system, and see if you can try to select different months. They are trying to implement things, for seasonal businesses and other permutations for calculations. The last time I checked, that had not been updated so that you could select different periods, but I know there is a goal to do that. So I would suggest logging in, getting yourself set up with an account, and seeing if you can. The form is extensive. It's actually not a very long form for a grant, but it is highly structured. So I think they were working on trying to make it a little bit more open. And actually, that gets to another question that I saw a number of times here. Can you connect us with anybody that writes grants? Which is a valid question. In the case of a lot of the grants, this grant and a lot of the ones that Paul highlighted, I actually, there really isn't a need for a grant writer. There isn't a lot of pros involved in these grants. These are programs that are driven more by calculations. So this is one of the reasons why folks like Jeannie are a little bit exhausted, because it's actually fallen a lot more on the accountants than grant writers for this sort of thing, because it is using your business metrics to apply for it. So my biggest piece of advice with all of these programs is to talk to your accountant, and Jeannie and MMP are some wonderful ones to work with. I've worked with them many times. Another question about the time period, still expecting disbursements. Yeah, Karina, if it's been more than a month, and it looks like in your case it has, I would call Service Ontario, and you can also use that email address that was listed on the last slide. And then again, those slides will be circulated, so you can pick those up afterwards as well. Another question on timelines. We're getting that a lot, and I think for our next session, I'm going to touch base with the folks at the Ontario government to see if we can get an updated timeline, because I do know that they've been swamped with applications for good reason. Okay, give me 1 second here. If we're starting a business. Personalize. Okay, yes, here we go. For the requirement regarding number of employees, does this mean full-time equivalents or casual or part-time? I.e., if a business has over 100 part-time employees, will that disqualify them? Jeannie, what have you seen with that? Are we talking full-time equivalents, or are we talking bodies with a T4?
I think the answer is bodies with a T4, although I understand, you could have 3 part-time employees that may not necessarily add up to the numbers of 1 full-time employee, but my understanding reading it is that it's the number of employees and not necessarily the number of hours that they work or anything like that. So if the number does approach 100, like it gets close, then maybe you want to look at that a little bit more closely. So that's my understanding, but I mean, if there was some sort of, maybe there's a clarification that we can get, but so far, as far as I can tell, it's 100 employees that would get a T4, like you mentioned, Brian.
And I believe in the session that we had with the representative from the Ontario government, I believe that was what she had said as well. I have not heard of any changes to that, so I think it's probably a safe bet to say that it is not full-time equivalents. So the addition of 2 people at halftime makes 1. Unfortunately, it's count the number of T4s that you've got. Are we eligible if we have more than 9 employees? We're currently at 21. As long as you, so this is another question. as long as you satisfy the other criteria, then yeah, nine should be fine. um, uh, okay, there are a lot of taxi owners and operators that have GST number registrations and they pay their taxes here. They are owner-operator taxi business. How could they become eligible for the Ontario government grant if they do not incorporate their businesses? So, Jeannie, I might pass that over to you. Again, it's a structural question of, if they're not incorporated, sole proprietor, but have, can they have a business number? Can they apply for that? And can they apply for the grant?
Yep, if you have a GST number registration, you should be eligible because you would that automatically means you have a business number as well. So as long as you have a business number, meaning that if you're registered for GST, you would have a business number, then you should be able to apply for this grant, assuming that you meet all the other criteria.
Mm-hmm. And again, that for if you look at your GST number, that's the numbers that are prior to the what is it, the RT001 usually.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Right. Okay.
The business number normally ends in RC 0001 or
yes.
so that would just be the same number.
Okay, perfect. We've applied for approval. Okay, we've applied for and got approval for this grant. However, we do not have a brick and mortar facility. A friend of mine mentioned that that was part of the eligibility, and this business is concerned that now they shouldn't have been approved for this. So, assuming that this is the Ontario Small Business Support Grant, which I suspect it is. Yeah, I think I mentioned before, but I'll say it again. The use of proceeds is not prescribed in the way that many other grants are. So if the way you want to use this grant is to cover the cost of your brick and mortar shop, great. If you don't have a brick and mortar shop, that's okay too. If your costs are related to some sort of capital costs that you have to continue to pay for during COVID, salaries, that is okay. The Ontario government has left this very, very, very open for companies, which is good. Yes. Oh.
Let me just jump in here and say that there are actually a number of examples in the list of eligible businesses that have no brick and mortar to them. So I think you can be very assured on that score.
Yeah, jumping to mind, honestly, for many of them, not-for-profit organizations often do not have that sort of physical footprint. They may have an office, but they often don't have that sort of hard asset of a brick and mortar store. So no, my read on this is that you should be eligible as long as you meet all the other criteria, and hopefully that assuages any feelings like that you got it inappropriately. I would talk to your accountant because again, we're not acting as accountants on this call because we don't know your full situation. So I would talk to your accountant just in case there's some other piece of information that we don't know. But I think you should be okay to spend that money on what you need it for. Excuse me. Bear with me one second here. Our company has software for the hospitality market and was working prior to COVID. Since then, the hospitality market has been in a bit of a tailspin, which is unfortunate but true. We seem to fall between the cracks. Because we are providing software but it's for a sector that has virtually shut down. Are there any ideas? For Martin, my recommendation for you and for any businesses that were operating pre-COVID, but aren't in that list of grants, take a look at the FedDev RRRF program, the Regional Relief and Recovery Fund program. It is not a wage subsidy program, it's a debt program, much like the SEBA, the bank account. Those programs are probably your best bet because yes, you are of course affected by COVID. Hopefully you were able to use Qs, CEWS to offset some wages, things like that. But in terms of grants and debt, that would be my biggest recommendation for you, Martin, and anybody else that has a company that was operating before COVID and is sort of dependent on some of these sectors that have been heavily hit. Next question is from Jana. We are applying as a charity and we already receive a 40% property tax rebate from the City of Toronto. Do we still qualify for the property tax support through the Ontario Business Grant? My understanding is the answer is yes. Jeannie, is there anything that you can think of there that would preclude them from using the small business grant for the remainder of their property tax bill, if that's where they choose to spend it, assuming all the other criteria are met and all that?
No, of course, they can use it to, like you said, they can use the funds against anything. I think that there's also an additional potential rebate that they are eligible for through the province if they're also eligible for the Ontario Small Business Support Grant that they would separately apply for. So, you know, it says here, all small businesses that are eligible for the Ontario Small Business Support Grant also eligible for property tax and energy bill rebates. So that would be, I think that would be on top of the grant that they would get from the small business grant. So even though there's a Toronto or City of Toronto property tax, but there's also the Ontario portion. So I think that they would be eligible.
Okay, good. Kristen, hopefully that's helpful helpful for you. Give me 1 second here. Relatively new company. A lot of questions from new companies and people starting to try and build businesses. I will if there is a budget sometime soon, hopefully before October, I think was when we had the provincial budget last year. I am hoping for all of you that have started businesses in the last 6 months or a year. I'm hoping that there are some supports for recovery and rejuvenation of the economy. I am expecting some of that. There's a lot of questions this week on that. I don't have any answers yet, but what we might do is hold a specific session for that should some of those programs become active. But for now, there's not a lot. You do need a lot of those comparison periods and the revenue decline. Another question about are sole proprietors without a brick and mortar store eligible? I have a business that runs pop-ups throughout the year and rents a safe space in small shops. These shops had to close during the lockdown, and then my markets were also canceled. Can I apply? Again, I read the full question because I want to drive home the point that, you know, absolutely brick and mortar businesses, non-brick and mortar businesses are eligible and should be looking for it. If you meet the other criteria, absolutely you should be looking for and applying for this grant. Another question on the timing. 2 questions on the timing in a row, actually. One applied on January 15th, one applied on January 20th. We'll try and get some clarity for the next webinar that we run on how the province is performing in terms of meeting its timing goals. We're now in almost March, so that's definitely pushing what they had had indicated would be the timing. And from the volume of questions that are on that, it sounds like there definitely are some issues though. So we'll try and get an answer for all of those on that. This is a very good question. How do you correct an error once you've submitted your application? This goes back to the nature of the attestation that you are making. You're attesting that everything that you have submitted in the form is correct. Because of that, if you have submitted the form and realized, whoops, something was wrong in there, we need to fix this, you do have to go through a bit of a process. And Paul, I'm glad you have the slide up still that you do. The phone number that is there, again, is for Service Ontario. The guidance from the people managing this program are to call that number and work your way through the telephone system, which I am certain will not be the easiest process. But you have to get the administrators of the program to basically unlock your application so that you can resubmit it. You cannot simply ask them to change a detail. You have to basically do a full new resubmission. What we don't know is whether that changes your position in the queue for processing. So, obviously, if there's errors in there, they should be fixed. We don't know if that will change your place in the queue though for processing. So it is a bit of a process, but I would recommend calling that Service Ontario number as soon as possible to try and get them to unsubmit that application so that you can resubmit it with the correct information. I wish there was an easier solution for that one, because I know there's a few people that have gone through that process, and it does take a bit of navigating through Service Ontario to get to the right people. Question on corporate structure and are they eligible to apply? Are nonprofits and charities eligible to apply? Yes, the answer is yes. It is a very open program, so sole proprietors, corporations, nonprofits, charities, all are eligible to apply. It might be worth pausing for a moment, and one of the qualifying criteria or in the guidelines is that extraordinary items can be taken out basically of the revenue comparison. So if you happen to sell a big piece of property as a business or as a nonprofit, or you got a great big lump sum grant for a special project, well, actually, Jeannie, maybe I'll ask you. In general terms, because I know every business is different, what would you consider extraordinary items that people might be able to say, look, this wasn't our normal revenue, but we did have this, and can they change that or remove that from the calculation for their comparison periods?
Yeah, so like I think both Q's and SIRS as well, it doesn't include extraordinary items in the revenue. So it is a little bit of interpretation as to what an extraordinary item would be. But I think some of the criteria include that it's non-recurring, maybe it's unusual in nature, and that it's not expected to continue. I think another, and all of these things is like, we wouldn't necessarily have to meet all of these criteria, but it would sort of be like looking at it holistically to see if it sort of meets the overall concept of what would be extraordinary. So some examples of extraordinary would be, it would be some of the COVID funding, I think would be considered extraordinary. I think, however, that sometimes it does depend, like if it's, for example, like the Qs would not be included in the revenue determination and things like that. If you received, like let's say a one-time grant for something, that would be unusual. It's not a recurring thing that you get on a monthly basis or an annual basis, then that would be extraordinary. So those are just a couple of examples. Maybe there was a large sale during the year of one of the assets that might be excluded as well because it wouldn't be normal and recurring. So I mean, all of those are not necessarily hard and fast, like that there isn't some interpretation for each of those items, but generally speaking, you would look for things that, would be unusual and don't happen on a regular basis in your business.
And it's a good question because there's actually a number of questions here on it. Jeannie, in terms of documentation, because it is a bit of a judgment call, people obviously work with your accountant to help make that judgment call. What sort of documentation would you recommend people keep? Is it past financials to show that this was a sort of one-time thing? What would you have people bring to their accountant to help them try to understand that this whether it would qualify as extraordinary or not? And I asked the question because we've had a number of these questions, and knowing how busy all of my accounting friends are these days, what could they prepare for you to help you make that judgment call?
I think just a proper description of what the item relates to. So, maybe like in general with the revenue, right? To break that down, first of all, on a monthly basis, because a lot of these programs are looking at the revenue on a monthly basis. So you would kind of have that revenue set out. And then if there's components of your revenue, so like let's say there are a couple of different income streams, that might be helpful just to see how that would look. And then finally, if there's something unusual, particularly where there might be a large amount of revenue in 1 month that, sort of looks out of line with the others, that you would kind of take a look at that and just be able to kind of isolate that, provide a description as to what it relates to and why it was received. That would probably be helpful. So, when accountants sort of look at that information, that's really what we're trying to do. It's just organizing the information, making sure that we can see the different components of it, because that's what the CRA would also be looking at if they were to question those types of things. So it's just being as organized as possible with as much information as you can provide.
Perfect. Thank you. And actually another question for you, Jeannie. We have a business here that pays all their employees in cash. There is not really any guidance or any information as to whether they provide a T4 at the end of the year or not. But if a company, all their expenses were paid out in cash, I guess it really depends on what sort of documentation that they've got for the business. Anything that you'd recommend there to make sure, that they're doing things properly and, in terms of payroll, and whether they would be able to claim any of those expenses if they're not, I guess.
Yeah, so good question. I guess even if they're paid in cash, right? Like presumably these amounts are going through the bank account. So like if the money for some reason is being withdrawn from the bank account and then paid to the employees or paid for other things to satisfy payments to suppliers or vendors even, or things like that, that it would still kind of go in and out of the bank account, because I think when the CRA does look at it, they still want to tie bank transactions with whatever you're doing. So ideally that is happening and that you're able to have that proper paper trail, so that when the CRA kind of ties in, what did you say you paid for your expenses, including your employees, then you have that number there that's reflected on your bank statement. I think that's very, very helpful. I think also obviously having an accounting system, or however you do report, you keep your books and records, that these transactions would all be reported through your accounting system as they occur, or like at least on a regular basis, like let's say a weekly basis or bi-weekly basis at a minimum, so that everything kind of gets reflected there as well. And then when you're kind of reconciling everything, it all just makes sense. So I think it kind of just starts with being organized and then having that proper trail and having the records there, even if for some reason certain payments do have to be made in cash. And then also proper controls as well, even though I know that's not really necessarily related to these programs, but sometimes if you're handling a lot of cash, right, like there can be some security issues with that. So you just want to make sure you're kind of looking at that, and that you're minimizing the risks to yourself, your business, that there's perhaps some sort of fraud that could happen, or theft or something. So you just want to protect yourself and your business from those types of things as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, and I note that we're running down on time here a little bit, so I'm gonna end off my questions, or Q&A, with a question about dog walkers. There was definitely a little bit of discussion about dog walkers at the beginning of this December lockdown. I believe there's still some confusion as to whether they were ever actually shut down. But shortly after, I believe in January, it was clarified that dog walkers could operate for the health and safety of the animals. We didn't actually get any clarity as to whether dog walkers, because of that confusion, were able to apply for this program or not. And that's one thing that I would want to take up with that email address that's still on the screen, small business support grant@ontario.ca, because there was some confusion about that one at the very beginning. It seemed like both on the government side and the entrepreneur side. So there is a chance that because at the beginning there was a lack of clarity, it might be eligible. But I would want to speak specifically to somebody in the Ontario government. We'll try and find out as well because of that confusion as to whether it was a business that was I don't want to say outlawed, that could not operate initially, but it was cleared up so that dog walkers are now allowed to operate. So hopefully you're back in operations. And with that, I think we've got about 4 minutes left. On my side, I really, really, really do want to thank Jeannie from MNP for joining us today. This is the absolute heart of tax season, T4 season, getting that out to businesses. So, Jeannie, thank you so much for joining us today. Just the level of clarity that you bring to these discussions makes all the difference. So, thank you very much for joining us. And
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
Absolutely. And Margie, I'll pass it back over to you.
Great. Thanks, Brian. And yes, thank you, Jeannie. And thanks, Paul, once again. It's great team effort. And we really appreciate your support in trying to figure out a lot of the information in these grants. The businesses I know really appreciate it, and a lot of the emails that I get back from them. So in conclusion, I just wanted to let everybody know that I will be sending out an email to everyone that registered for this session, probably within the next 24 hours. And you'll get a copy of the slide deck that Paul just presented this afternoon. And you'll also get a link to the webinar recording. So if you want to go back and hear some of the things that you didn't get the first time, you can certainly hear that anytime you want on demand. As I mentioned, probably within the next 24 hours. So thanks again for joining us this afternoon. We are grateful, and we hope you found it of value. Have a lovely afternoon.